The village of Asantman, nestled amidst green hills and bustling with the vibrancy of Ghanaian culture, seemed like a peaceful haven. But for 15-year-old Kezia Afrain, it became the setting of a nightmare that would haunt her for years. It was a Friday evening, the air fragrant with the aroma of fried plantains and groundnut soup wafting from nearby homes. Kezia was walking back from the river after fetching water, her laughter still echoing in her mind from a joke a friend had told her earlier. She was carefree, her two braids swinging as she hummed a tune, the cool clay pot balanced expertly on her head. She was about 10 minutes away from home when she noticed them, Paul and Samuel, two boys she had seen around the village but never spoken to. They were older, in their early 20s, and known for their unruly behavior. Still, Kezia thought nothing of it when they called out to her.
"Yai, Kezia. Beautiful Kezia, won't you stop and talk to us?"
Paul called out, his smile wide but unsettling.
Good evening.
She replied politely, quickening her steps. But they didn't let her pass. Samuel stepped into her path, his tall frame blocking her way.
Don't rush, small girl. We just want to talk.
Her heart skipped a beat. The tone of his voice wasn't friendly. It was taunting, predatory. Kezia tried to move around him, but Paul grabbed her arm.
Let me go!
She shouted, her voice trembling with fear.
"No need to shout.
Paul said, his grip tightening.
We're all friends here, aren't we?"
The laughter that followed sent chills down her spine. Kezia screamed for help, her voice echoing through the empty path, but no one came. The village was quiet, the usual hum of life fading as night settled. In a blur of terror, they dragged her into a secluded area near the bushes. Kezia fought with all her strength, kicking and scratching, but they were too strong. Her cries pierced the night, but they fell on deaf ears. When it was over, Kezia lay on the ground, her clothes torn, her spirit shattered. Paul and Samuel disappeared into the darkness, leaving her broken and alone. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to her feet, clutching the clay pot that now seemed impossibly heavy. She stumbled back to her house, her legs trembling beneath her. When her mother, Mrs. Afrain, saw her, the pot crashing to the ground was the only sound that broke the silence.
Kezia! What happened?
Her mother cried, rushing to her side. Kezia couldn't speak. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her father, hearing the commotion, ran out of the house.
"Who did this to you?"
He roared, his voice thick with rage. Kezia could barely whisper their names.
Paul. Samuel.
The Afrain family went to the village chief the next morning, demanding justice. But justice was elusive. Paul and Samuel came from influential families in the village, and the elders, swayed by bribes and pressure, refused to take decisive action.
"They are young boys,"
one elder said dismissively.
"Why ruin their future over a single mistake?"
Kezia's father slammed his fist on the table.
"And what about my daughter's future? Has anyone thought of that?"
But their pleas fell on deaf ears. Paul and Samuel roamed the village freely, unrepentant, while Kezia became the subject of gossip and whispers. 2 months later, Kezia's world crumbled further when her mother noticed her unusual weight gain and constant nausea. A visit to the village nurse confirmed their worst fear. Kezia was pregnant. Kezia broke down, her wails echoing through the small clinic.
Why, God? Why me?
She cried, pounding her fists against the walls. Her mother held her tightly, tears streaming down her own face.
It's not your fault, my child. Don't blame yourself.
But Kezia couldn't hear her. All she could think about was the life growing inside her, a constant reminder of that night. The days that followed were a blur of pain and isolation. Kezia refused to leave the house, ashamed of the stares and whispers from the villagers. Her father grew quieter, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Her mother became her only source of comfort, spending hours by her side, reassuring her that they would get through this together. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Kezia sat by the window, staring into the distance. Her mother approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder.
Kezia,
She said gently,
your father and I have decided. After the baby is born, you will go to Canada to live with your grandparents. You need a fresh start, away from here.
Kezia turned to her mother, her eyes filled with despair.
What about the baby? I don't know if I can love it. How can I?
Her mother's eyes softened.
We will love the baby. We will raise it as our own. You need to focus on healing, my child.
Months later, Kezia gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The first time she held Abigail, she felt a mixture of love and pain. She looked into her daughter's innocent eyes and wondered how something so pure could come from such darkness. The decision to leave was not easy, but Kezia knew it was the right one. With a heavy heart, she kissed Abigail goodbye and boarded the plane to Canada, leaving behind her past and the village that had failed her. As the plane soared into the sky, Kezia looked out the window, tears streaming down her face. She vowed to rebuild her life, no matter how broken she felt. What she didn't know was that her journey of healing had only just begun. Years passed, but the memory of that fateful night never truly left Kezia. In Canada, she worked hard to rebuild her life. Living with her grandparents, she excelled in her studies, threw herself into a career in nursing, and began to piece together a sense of self-worth. Yet, despite her achievements, the trauma lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. Back in Ghana, Kezia's daughter, Abigail, was growing up under the loving care of Kezia's parents. Abigail became the joy of the Afrain household, her laughter filling the once quiet home. Kezia would send letters, money, and pictures, but she always felt a twinge of guilt for being so far away. One evening, during a phone call with her mother, Kezia asked the question she had been dreading.
How's Abigail doing? Is she asking about me?
Her mother sighed.
She's doing well, Kezia. She's a smart girl, top of her class. But yes, she does ask about you. She wants to know why you're not here.
The guilt hit Kezia like a wave.
What do you tell her?
We tell her you're working hard to build a better future for both of you.
Her mother replied softly.
But, Kezia, she needs her mother. When will you come home?
Kezia's voice trembled.
I don't know, Ma. I don't know if I'm ready to face everything again.
Her mother's tone grew firm.
It's been 10 years, Kezia. You can't run forever. Abigail needs to know her mother. And you need to confront your past, or it will haunt you forever.
My heart told myself I'd never let the past restart. But here you stand, love in your hands, trying to make me understand. I see the echoes of where I've been, a story carved into my skin. Can I move past the fire and ash, or will I let this moment crash?
That night, Kezia lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about Abigail, now a teenager, and the bond they had yet to form. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to raise Abigail. Most of all, she thought about herself and the fear that gripped her every time she imagined returning to Asantman. After weeks of agonizing over the decision, Kezia finally booked a flight home. The day of her arrival was bittersweet. Her parents and Abigail were waiting at the airport, their faces lighting up when they saw her. Kezia's heart swelled with emotion as she embraced her parents. But when she turned to Abigail, the young girl hesitated.
Abigail.
Kezia said, her voice cracking.
It's me, your mother.
Abigail studied her for a moment before smiling shyly.
You look different from the pictures.
Kezia laughed through her tears.
Well, I've aged a little.
The drive back to the village was filled with awkward but heartfelt conversation. Kezia learned about Abigail's favorite books, her love for music, and her dream of becoming a doctor. Abigail, in turn, asked about Canada, her mother's life there, and why she had been away for so long. As the weeks passed, Kezia and Abigail began to bond. Kezia tried her best to make up for lost time, attending Abigail's school events and helping with her studies. But the closer they grew, the more Kezia felt the weight of the truth she had been hiding. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Abigail turned to her mother.
Mama,
She began hesitantly.
why did you leave me?
Kezia's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment.
I didn't leave you, Abigail.
She said softly.
I had to go because I needed to heal. Something bad happened to me before you were born, and I wasn't strong enough to stay.
Abigail frowned.
What happened?
Kezia hesitated, tears welling in her eyes.
It's a story for another time. Just know that I love you, and I've always loved you.
Kezia thought she could keep the past buried, but fate had other plans. During a village festival, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Paul. Her breath caught in her throat as memories of that night came rushing back. He was older now, his hair speckled with gray, but his presence was as menacing as ever. Kezia froze, panic taking hold. Her father noticed her discomfort and followed her gaze.
That's him, isn't it?
He asked quietly. Kezia nodded, her hands trembling.
What's he doing here? I thought he left the village.
Her father's face darkened.
He came back a few years ago. He's a changed man now, or so people say. He's married and has children of his own.
Kezia clenched her fists.
He doesn't deserve peace. Not after what he did to me.
Her father placed a hand on her shoulder.
I know, my daughter. But holding on to this anger will only hurt you more.
Kezia avoided Paul for weeks, but the past refused to stay hidden. One day, Abigail excitedly told her about a young man she had met, a kind, thoughtful guy named Jacob.
He's wonderful, Mama.
Abigail gushed.
I think you'll really like him.
But when Kezia finally met Jacob, her world came crashing down. He was Paul's son.
You can't see him anymore.
Kezia blurted out, her voice shaking. Abigail's smile faded.
Why not? What's wrong with him?
It's not him.
Kezia said, struggling to keep her composure.
It's his father.
Abigail frowned.
What does his father have to do with us?
Kezia took a deep breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on her.
Because his father is the reason I left this village. He hurt me in ways I can never forget.
The revelation rocked Abigail's world. She couldn't believe the man she loved was connected to her mother's trauma. But as she processed the truth, she realized she couldn't punish Jacob for his father's sins.
Mama,
Abigail said one evening.
I love Jacob. And I know you're hurt, but he's not his father. Please don't make me choose between you and him.
Kezia wrestled with her emotions, torn between protecting her daughter and letting go of her pain. Finally, she decided to meet with Paul. When they sat face to face, Paul looked genuinely remorseful.
Kezia,
He said, his voice low.
I can never undo what I did to you. But I've spent years trying to be a better man. Please, don't let my mistakes ruin our children's happiness.
Tears streamed down Kezia's face.
You stole my innocence, Paul. You broke me.
I know,
He said, his own eyes glistening.
and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Jacob loves your daughter. Give them the chance to build something good.
The next day, Kezia did something she never thought she'd do. She went to Paul's house and asked to speak with Jacob. When he appeared, nervous and unsure, Kezia took a deep breath.
Jacob,
She began.
I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll love my daughter, protect her, and never cause her the kind of pain your father caused me.
Jacob, his eyes filled with sincerity, nodded.
I promise, ma'am. I love Abigail, and I'll do everything in my power to make her happy.
Kezia nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. While the scars of her past would never fully heal, she realized that love and forgiveness could pave the way for a brighter future. She found out after a DNA test that Paul was not the father of Abigail, rather, Samuel was her father. Samuel had passed on in a fatal accident few years ago before Kezia's arrival to Asantman. And in that moment, as Abigail and Jacob embraced her with gratitude, Kezia finally found peace. Months later, Kezia invited Jacob over for dinner. It was an awkward meal at first, but as the evening went on, Kezia began to see the man Jacob truly was: kind, respectful, and nothing like his father.
I see why Abigail loves you.
Kezia admitted as they cleared the table.
You're not your father, Jacob. And I shouldn't have judged you for his actions.
Jacob nodded, his heart swelling with relief.
Thank you, Miss Kezia. I promise to always treat Abigail with the love and respect she deserves.
Years later, Abigail and Jacob married in a small, intimate ceremony. Kezia stood by her daughter's side, smiling as Abigail walked down the aisle. Though the past would never be forgotten, it no longer held them captive. Kezia found peace in knowing her daughter's love was built on kindness and trust, not pain and betrayal. And as she watched Abigail and Jacob exchange vows, she felt hope bloom in her heart, a hope for a future defined not by scars, but by love and healing.
Can love be enough to make this right?